The story of African Americans does not begin in bondage. It begins with civilizations, families, languages, and traditions that existed long before the world tried to redefine them through captivity. And for many communities, it begins even earlier, in a story of migration, survival, and identity that stretches back to the ancient world. Before the chains, before the auction blocks, before the Middle Passage carved its wound into history, there was life. Full, complex, spiritual, and deeply rooted life. To understand the devastation that followed, we must first understand what existed before the ships. West Africa, before the transatlantic slave trade, was not an empty land. It was a mosaic of societies: Wolof, Mandinka, Akan, Yoruba, Igbo, Congo, and many others, each with their own languages, customs, and social structures. People lived in bustling trade cities, rural farming villages, river communities, desert caravan hubs, spiritual centers. They farmed, fished, crafted, built, traded, worshipped, and raised families. Children learned through stories, apprenticeships, and community guidance. The elders passed down wisdom. Music, rhythm, and oral tradition shaped identity. This was a world of meaning, a world of belonging, a world of humanity. Some traditions and historical interpretations, including those discussed in works like From Babylon to Timbuktu, describe a movement of Jewish-identified communities into Africa after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE. When the Romans destroyed the temple and scattered the people, many fled southward into Egypt, across the Sahara, into the Sahel, and eventually into West Africa. Over generations, these communities blended into the cultural landscape, participating in trade, forming scholarly centers, preserving elements of their identity, adapting to local customs. While not all West Africans shared this lineage, these traditions highlight how diverse and interconnected the region was long before European contact. This is part of the story, a reminder that the people taken across the Atlantic came from societies with deep histories and complex identities. By the medieval period, West Africa had become a crossroads of cultures. Islamic scholars, Jewish-identified communities, indigenous spiritual groups, traders from across the Sahara, local kingdoms and empires, cities like Timbuktu became centers of learning, home to libraries, scholars, and merchants. Families lived in structured communities with traditions passed down through generations. This was not a people without history. This was a people with centuries of identity. As European powers began exploring the African coast, their actions were shaped by political and religious documents of the time. One such document, Romanus Pontifex, issued in the 15th century, granted Portugal authority over certain regions and trade routes. It encouraged exploration and expansion, decisions that would later influence the systems that fueled the transatlantic slave trade. This does not mean every event was pre-planned or targeted at specific groups, but it shows how early European policies laid the groundwork for what would come. As Europeans mapped West Africa, they often imposed their own labels and interpretations. One of the most referenced examples is the Negro Land map, a European creation that grouped diverse peoples under a single term. These maps reflected European perspectives, misunderstood local identities, oversimplified complex regions, shaped how outsiders viewed West Africa. They did not represent how Africans saw themselves. They represented how Europeans categorized the world they were trying to control. This misrepresentation would later influence how enslaved Africans were viewed, not as individuals with identities, but as a single, dehumanized category. Before the ships arrived, West Africa was organized, spiritual, skilled, diverse, interconnected, full of families, traditions, and stories. Some communities traced their heritage to ancient migrations. Others had lived in the region for centuries. All were part of a vibrant world that existed long before captivity. And when the transatlantic slave trade began, it did not just take bodies. It tore people from their families, their languages, their traditions, their histories, their identities. The devastation that followed can only be understood by first acknowledging the richness that existed before it. Before the ships, there was life. Before the chains, there was identity. Before the trauma, there was culture, community, and history. This is where the story begins. Not in bondage, but in the fullness of a world that deserves to be remembered. The world before the ships was full of life, families, traditions, languages, and communities that had existed for centuries. But the arrival of European traders on the West African coast marked the beginning of a new and devastating chapter. The transatlantic slave trade did not begin with ships. It began on land, with disruption, betrayal, conflict, and the slow tightening of a system that would reshape continents. Before the Middle Passage, there was the forced march. Before the auction blocks, there was the kidnapping. Before the chains, there was the moment everything changed. This is the story of how people were taken from their homes, their families, and their worlds, long before they ever saw the ocean. For centuries, West Africa had been a region of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Caravans crossed the Sahara. Merchants traveled between kingdoms. Communities interacted through commerce, marriage, and migration. But when European ships began appearing along the coast in the 1400s, the balance of power shifted. At first, interactions were limited: trade for goods, negotiations with local rulers, cautious exchanges. But as European demand for labor grew, especially in the Americas, the nature of these interactions changed. The trade in human beings became a system that would eventually pull millions into its grip. The transatlantic slave trade did not start with people boarding ships. It started with capture. People were taken through raids, local conflicts, political rivalries, targeted kidnappings, exploitation of existing tensions. Some were taken while farming, some while traveling, some while sleeping, some while defending their communities. Some were betrayed by rival groups or leaders under pressure from European traders. The system fed on instability. It fed on conflict. It fed on desperation. It fed on the growing power imbalance between Europe and Africa. And once someone was taken, the journey toward the coast began. The march to the coast could last days, weeks, or even months. People were moved in groups, often tied or restrained in ways that prevented escape, but did not require graphic description to understand the suffering. The march was designed to break. Strength, hope, identity, connection to home people were forced to walk long distances under harsh conditions. They were taken through forests, across rivers, and along paths that led farther and farther from everything they knew. Some tried to escape. Some resisted. Some were punished. Some were forced to continue. The march was the first stage of a system built to strip people of control over their own lives. When captives reached the coast, they were taken to forts, castles, coastal compounds, temporary holding areas. These places were not designed for comfort or humanity. They were designed for containment. People were held until ships arrived. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. They were separated from their families. They were separated from their communities. They were separated from their identities. This was the moment when many realized they were not being taken to another region. They were being taken out of their world entirely. The forced march and the coastal holding pens existed because European powers created a system that demanded labor for plantations in the Caribbean, Brazil, the American South. This demand reshaped West Africa, destabilizing kingdoms, fueling conflicts, encouraging raids, creating economic incentives for capture. The system was not random. It was structured, organized, and profitable for those who controlled it. And it was devastating for those caught in it. The forced march was not just a physical journey. It was the beginning of a psychological and cultural rupture. People were taken from their languages, names, families, traditions, spiritual practices, communities. The march was the first step in a process designed to disconnect people from everything that made them who they were. But even in this moment of devastation, people held onto fragments of identity, songs, prayers, memories, names, stories. Hope these fragments would become seeds of resilience in the generations to come. As captives waited in coastal forts, they could hear the ocean. They could see the ships anchored offshore. They could feel the weight of uncertainty. Some had never seen the sea before. Some did not know what awaited them. Some feared they would never return. Some prayed. Some resisted. Some held on to hope. This was the final moment before the Middle Passage, the moment when the world they knew ended, and a new, unimaginable chapter began. And yet, even in this darkness, people carried fragments of identity that would survive across generations. This is the beginning of the journey, the moment when captivity began on land.